All right, geographers, we're going to talk some evolution, some natural selection, all that good stuff today. But we're also it's going to be connected to geography as well, and that's something that with evolution and specifically natural selection and everything that Darwin came up with, it's a very spatial concept. Geography is key to this stuff. It's not just what is happening in terms of species evolution and biodiversity and all that, but it's also where is it taking place, or where are these organisms located, and that kind of stuff. All right. So last time we were discussing ecological biogeography, so looking at ecosystems and the food web concept, communities, all of that stuff. So we're looking at how within an ecosystem are these spatial connections. Today, I'm going to get into historical biogeography, which is where we're looking at spatial relationships and distribution and all of that, but we're also adding this key component of time. I'm going to introduce the idea of things taking place over a lengthy period of time, and this is yet another example of where this concept of an ancient planet Earth is of the utmost importance. All right, and pop quiz: how old is the Earth? 4.6 billion years old, right? Fantastic. So that's important because evolution needs a long period of time to have the kinds of results that we have. And I'm going to get into that. All right, so with evolution, the general idea behind it is that we're looking at species diversity. Okay? And specifically, the evolution we are talking about is that species diversity comes through this process of natural selection. And I'm going to get into exactly what natural selection is in a moment, but that's Charles Darwin's key contribution here. Okay? The idea that everybody was talking about evolution and this idea of species diversity before Darwin, but he was the one who came up with that mechanism of natural selection. He helped to explain how is it that we have this species diversity. That's the idea. Now, that term, species diversity, it might not be the most obvious thing. What we're talking about is the fact that we just have so many different species of mammals and birds and reptiles and different things. Like, well, here, pop quiz. Look at this picture here. What is that? Now, hopefully, you could at least look at it and say monkey, right? Because it's very monkey-like. But what kind of monkey? Rhymes with Schmider. Perfect. Yes, spider monkey. Very good. And you'll see, like last time I was talking about all sorts of birds with the ecological stuff. I don't know my birds. But background in anthropology. I know me and my monkeys and my apes, and we'll be looking at that. We'll be dealing with stuff I'm a little more comfortable with today in terms of the exact species. But so this is a spider monkey that we're looking at, and these things are cool, and we'll talk about them. When I get into biomes, I'll talk about them. In there, in the tropical rainforest biomes, they're just cool monkeys. They're also terrifying. If you ever get the chance to hold one, maybe don't, or wear a helmet. They got sharp teeth, man, and these black, dark, dead eyes. They're kind of intense, and they're a little bigger than you might expect. But that's it. Be safe, but whenever you can hold a monkey, do it. But anyway, so it's this cool kind of monkey, and we can look at it and we can tell, that's a monkey. But there are also a bunch of other types of monkeys, different species of monkeys. All right, squirrel monkeys and capuchins and baboons and owl-faced monkeys and colobus, like all these different things that all look very monkey-like. Like you can look at them and you say that's a monkey, but they're still different enough distinctly different enough to be a different species of monkey. Right? And so this our definition of species, which we will be using here, as I have written here on the screen, organisms capable of breeding to produce fertile offspring. Right? So you can have a male, whatever, spider monkey and a female spider monkey get together, play some music, have some drinks. They make little baby spider monkeys, right? And those baby spider monkeys can grow up, and they're able to reproduce as well, right? So that would be the definition. Whereas you take a spider monkey and say a baboon, no matter how beautiful the love is between that male spider monkey and that female baboon, they can't make babies, right? They could adopt, and they'd probably be great parents, but they can't reproduce, right? And you also have things like, a mule, right? Is a horse and a donkey get together. They can produce offspring, right? But the offspring is not fertile. So they can't go on and reproduce and make other mules, right? So technically donkeys and horses they're different species. Okay, so that's our definition. And so in looking at this, we've got a bunch of different species, just monkeys alone. There's a ridiculous amount of monkeys that are out there, and you can look at other things. Even, like I mentioned horses and donkeys, but even there, what is it, the equine family or whatever it is, you've got different things that are similar, but still distinctly different species, right? You can pretty much pick any animal, any creature out there in nature, you're going to see that, right? Different types of bears and, all sorts of stuff like that. Okay? So that's what we're getting at. Now, this question of different species and this species diversity, this was bugging everyone back in the 19th century. Probably bugging people before that, but we see this with Darwin. He was dealing with this question. And as I said, he didn't come up with this idea of evolution. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was realizing, and I say everybody, we're talking about, white folks, Europeans who had been out conquering the world, right? Taking land from brown people and enslaving people and, doing all that stuff. As these white folks are doing this, they're looking around and they're cataloging a bunch of stuff. It's a weird thing that people of science and academia have to live with, is that a lot of these incredible advances in knowledge and all this learning that went on and discoveries that went on, it was all done for some pretty evil, awful stuff. But a lot of scientists kind of, went along for the ride and, did it, whether they actually questioned why it was happening or not, right? But really all of it, the reason why people are talking about it is because of colonization, because white Europeans are heading out into the world, taking land, and as they're doing that, they're discovering a new species of this bird and that mammal and this reptile and so on, right? And everybody's realizing, my God, we got a lot of different types of snakes out there and birds and marsupials and all these different things. And so people start thinking, well, what's going on with that, right? Because if we go from the prevailing idea of how life came onto the planet, right, at this point in time, this, Europe, it's Christian. We have the Bible, we have Genesis, we have Adam and Eve, we have all this stuff, right? In that book, that's taken as this is how it worked. But as people start to explore, they realize, we got a lot of different stuff out there, right? And so, like the story of the Great Flood and Noah collecting two of each animal, that seems like an impossible task when people start to realize just how many different animals exist today at this moment in time, right? So here's Darwin himself from The Origin of Species, his big book that really launched natural selection. It's officially On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. We just kind of shorten it to Origin of Species. But here's Darwin. In considering the origin of species, it is quite conceivable that a naturalist, and naturalists there really, like, people like to say it's scientist or biologist or whatever. You know what it is? It's a geographer. Just so you know, don't tell the biology people. They get fussy about it. But really, what he's doing geography. Just between you and me. So anyway, it's quite conceivable that a naturalist, reflecting on the mutual affinities of organic beings, right? Mutual affinities meaning just looking at these different organic creatures, living creatures, right? What do they have? What's similar and yet different as well on their embryological relations, their geographical distribution, geological succession, and other such facts, might come to the conclusion that each species had not been independently created, but had descended, like varieties, from other species. So what he's saying there, what this big intro statement is saying is that, like, look, we look around, we got a lot of monkeys, people, right? Spider monkeys and squirrel monkeys and owl-faced monkeys and all these different things that exist, these different monkey creatures that exist. They're similar, they're different. I'll bet if we go back in time far enough, we start with one original monkey, right? Some common ancestor, something that doesn't exist today. And that's a key concept with evolution and natural selection. I'll keep coming back to it. But everything that's existing today descended, meaning, like, you go down the family tree. That's the descent idea. So we start with this origin species, but then you have changes, right? And that the changes are going to come from natural selection. But it's the idea that this original common ancestor monkey, some primitive, long extinct monkey, future generations go through enough changes to where, like, this group of this, we'll call it, monkey A, right? That's our original monkey that existed, however many millions of years ago. You've got monkey A exists, right? Male and female monkey A's, and they're getting together and they're making little baby monkey A's and so on. But in one group, in some other part, in some part of the world, here we'll get an isolation of how this works. But it's the idea that they'll go through some changes and they'll start to, be a little bit different from other members of monkey A. And through enough changes, this group of monkey A's, they actually now turn into monkey B, we'll call them, because they're different enough to where they actually become a new species, right? After a few different generations of these changes, it gets to the point where this group, monkey B, can no longer reproduce with other members of the monkey A group and have fertile offspring, right? They're technically different species. And so when that happens enough over a long enough period of time, that's how we can get all of these different types of monkeys that we see today. Right? So that's what he's getting into. And so not independently created. He's not saying anything about a Christian God coming in and actually starting life. And that's a key thing. I'll be getting into that. And Darwin, to be honest, devout Christian, and was actually torn with, how what he was finding was conflicting with the literal tales of the Bible and all that. But he was not some atheist. He wasn't trying to destroy God. He was instead, trying to make sense of his religious beliefs as well as what he was seeing out there in the world. Okay, that's a key idea. So he's what he's saying is, sure, God creates life on this planet, but it doesn't just stop there, right? It's the idea that life begins, and then it, over the years, undergoes these changes. And that's why we have so many different, yet quite similar, things that exist out in nature, right? That's the whole premise behind evolution and trying to figure this stuff out. How did we get this species diversity? Right? That's the key deal here. Now we're talking about Darwin. We're talking about God and all that stuff. It's a good time. to draw our lines, pick our sides, right? Are you team Jesus? Or are you team Darwin? Yeah, you got to pick, right? If we were actually in a classroom right now, that would be great. Because what I have you guys do is I put all the team Jesus people on one side and the team Darwin people on the other side, and I just let you guys fight. And sometimes students complain about like, what if I'm neither? Like there, like there are others teams you can be on. No, you don't see some like Islam fish on a car. No, if we have a car, we gotta put on our Jesus fish or Darwin fish, right? And I let students just fight, like not like with logic and debate and stuff like that. No, we punch each other. Well, I don't, but I have the students punch each other until we get to the point. Is it all about Jesus or all about godless Darwin or whatever? But, alas, you're listening to this online. We're not together in a classroom, so we can't fight in that way. And I don't really do that. I don't make my students fight. I have heard there's at least one biology professor at AVC who does like to pit people, actually like physically separate religious students from non-religious students, and like yell about religion and evolution and all that. It's nonsense. But a lot of it, this is what we love to do as a country, right? Is we like to pick sides and we fight for our side no matter what. And the sheer mention that maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other, oh, that means you're a communist, or any acknowledgement of that. It's ridiculous. But this is and it's kind of toned down a little. This was really big in the 90s, and it carried on into the early 2000s. These battles over this stuff. We're changing what we argue about now, right? But it wasn't only this too. This was a great thing because we had, like, this is always fun, where Darwin is getting eaten by Jesus Truth right there, and then somebody countered that by making a dinosaur eat Jesus Truth, who's eating Darwin. So there's a lot going on there. But here's the deal. Here's where a lot of people have been trying to get everybody. And this, I haven't seen this on a car. I found this online. But it's something that I want you folk who are, I would say you folk who are, religious in any way. It doesn't even have to be, Christian. Like whatever your faith is, you can put it in the context here. But it's the idea of that religious faith does not have to be at odds with Darwinian evolution. And really, when we put Darwin in this way, like it's kind of a stand-in, but it's your religion doesn't have to stand in the way of scientific evidence, right? You should bring this stuff together. And frankly, at least from a Christian standpoint, when you look at the majority of organized Christian churches and followers and all that stuff, most religious entities in the Christian faith fit into this camp right here. Like the Catholic Church, which is not known for its, progressive attitudes toward science and the origins of life and all of that. I mean, you can, read a book. You can see, check out Galileo did, as well as others throughout the years. But at this point in time, the Vatican employs scientists, people who continue to study this stuff, all of the evidence that's out there in the world. And of course, they're coming at it from this epistemological framing of, the stories of the Bible are true, maybe not in fact literal, but there is this Christian God who created everything. But in doing so, he also, created the laws of nature. And so, anything we're discovering is all because God started in the first place, right? Like there's nothing at all inherent in the way evolution works to say that there couldn't be some divine creator at the beginning who started it, right? So I bring this up, not because I, feel the need to turn it all religious or whatever, but I know a lot of students who I've had over the years in doing this are wrestling with this idea that they grew up hearing that all this evolution Darwin stuff is nonsense and it's, it's a sin effectively to even think about it, or to, even flirt with the idea that life wasn't created perfectly on day one, or I guess whenever day, 1 through 7, whenever it happened. 4, I don't know. But you get what I'm saying, right? Doesn't have to be that way, right? And it's a very distinctly American concept as well. And you see around the world, a lot of other people don't stress over that stuff, right? So I'm simply saying this to let you guys know, hey, let well, I don't want to say let Jesus and Darwin kiss. I mean, you can't if they want. Who's to stand in the way? But it's the idea that don't pick a side, right? Exist in the middle, and you find that with so much of this other stuff that's going on in the world, political debates that are occurring all the time. Um, you always be wary of jumping extremely onto one side and not being willing to kind of move toward the middle, right? To think about like it's because it's rarely A or B and that's it. There's other ground in which to work. Right? That's a very cryptic thing. Sign up, sign up for Geography 105 if you want to hear me talk more about how to make sense of the rest of it. We're talking evolution right now. All right, okay. So there you go. Don't have to pick a side. Now that said, let's make fun of this car. Right here, right? Yeah, let's pick on it. Let's pick a side. First, I really hope it's not yours. But it was taken locally, so it could be. I'm always waiting for that student to say, like, you dick. I took this, and I took this because there's one sticker on here that bugs me, angers me, frustrates me. And again, if we were in a classroom, I would say, and which one is it? And I'd let you guys kind of figure out, how well do you know me? We've spent what? A ridiculous amount of time together, months together. You should know me. You should know how I tick. You should be able to look at this and see that one sticker I can't stand. Which one is it? Is it the recovering evolutionist one? No, that's kind of funny because it's making like an alcoholism joke. So whenever you're bringing mental health stuff in, I mean, hilarious. No, that one fine, whatever. Real science is intelligent design. It's that's a logical fallacy, right? But I don't care. Like that's not a big deal. Oh, it's that one in the middle, right? Complex DNA code just happened. Really? Bugs me. There's one word in here that bugs me, and it's the just. Okay? Complex DNA code just happened. No. And no evolutionist, if that's even a word, like that doesn't even sound like a word. No person who studies or supports the notion of Darwinian evolution would argue that complex DNA code just happens, right? Because that's a snap of the fingers, right? That's just like instantly, boom, we got life that just shows up, right? And it's the just is like that. There's no divine plan. There's no intelligent design going on. Instead, it's just chemical reactions and chance. It's just randomly you have life just appear, and it's like ready to go, and as complex as it ever will be, and all that. No, and so what bugs me about this is like I'm all for if you learn about something and you're reading about it and hearing about it, you're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to sign on. That's fine as long as you actually understand why you're not signing on with it, right? Like that's what bugs me about people who attack this idea of evolution or anything else. Pick whatever topic is going on there. It's not the idea that they're disagreeing with me necessarily, but it's that idea of not taking the time to actually know what you're disagreeing against, right? And we should be in this process, and I'm not immune for this. This doesn't mean like I know everything, and so all of my opinions are right, but it is a case. Like if I'm going to go on and put a sticker on my car, like that's a firm commitment, right? I'm going to make sure I like really know what that sticker is all about, what it's saying, and so on. And there have been plenty of things throughout my adult life where I thought I understood, and that's why I didn't like them. But then I forced myself to learn a little more, talk to people, take classes, read books, like whatever it might be, experience the world in however you're going to do it, and realize, oh, actually, I didn't understand. That's why I didn't like this concept, or I didn't agree with it, because I didn't fully grasp it, right? And it could be a case of like, if this person, I could explain how slowly this stuff took place and this concept of billions of years and all of that, and they could still go, yeah, I still don't buy it. But still, with anything in life, work to grasp it before you dismiss it, right? That's the main point here. I just really struggle with stuff, okay? And struggle, it just came out, but that's quite Freudian in what we're going to be getting into, because struggle is a big part of Darwinian evolution. So we'll get to that as well. All right, okay. There's our pep talk. Pep talk over. Let's get into some evolution stuff. How does this work? What are the nuts and bolts here? Now, I got into already about this idea of species diversity, that we have a bunch of different stuff, but it's also a case when we're talking about evolution on this planet, we're getting into the idea that we start with very simple forms of life, okay? Single-celled organisms, like the stuff like when you're in biology class and you look in the pond water under the microscope and you see little gribblies swimming around, amoebas and parameciums and all those things. I think that's what we looked at long ago. So when you see that stuff, what you're looking at is a single cell organism. We spend what, like your sophomore year of high school, learning about that stuff, or whenever it is you do it. Okay, so cool. That's what we start out with. And this is billions of years ago, okay, when this really starts to develop. I think I have this next slide. We'll get back to that USGS concept, the model of the life on the earth and how it's evolved. But that happened a long time ago. And then slowly things change. These organisms adapt, they mutate, they modify. And a lot of that is based on environmental conditions, again, spatial conditions, geography stuff. But when that's successful, they pass along, these new traits that they have. And so these organisms get just a little more complex, and then a little more complex. And this is a slow process. So with evolution, it's not saying it's none of this just happen. It's not like you're going to have a baby and the baby's going to have wings. It's not like X-Men stuff, right? It's a slow, quite boring, rather unsexy process. But given enough time, when we're dealing with billions of years, we can have remarkable changes. We can have incredibly complex organisms existing, right? So we tend to go into my pictures and see, I'm not helping my case here. I put the pond water stuff and then Einstein, and that kind of has that just, right? Like you have this amoeba just hanging out in the pond, and then, the next day, it's Einstein crawling out, and it's like, here's how physics works. No, it's not that simple. Again, billions and billions of years. Another thing that's important to realize is that evolution does not tell a story. Right? It's not a case of, in the beginning with life, like this pond water stuff, it was garbage and very primitive and terrible, but over time things got more advanced until we get to modern humans and everything is perfect now. No, there's no indication that we are the pinnacle of evolution, that we are the most successful thing, we're the most advanced thing or whatever. We just happen to work at this moment in time. Okay? Honestly, if you're looking for something successful, You want to see as little evolution as possible, right? We just showed up. We're new. So we're an experiment right here. But then you hear like what sharks are something they haven't evolved for, millions of years and all that. Like that's good. That's great. That means their design, if you want to, design's always a fuzzy thing, but just the way a shark, all of its traits, all of its stuff, right? That works. It works for its environment. Okay. So don't get into that thought of like, well, I am the most advanced, most evolved thing to date, right? And if I have a child, that child will be the most evolved, advanced thing to date. No, you just work at this moment in time. And that's another myth we kind of have. Like we're working toward perfection. No, it's all based on current conditions and what traits are advantageous and which ones are not. Right? That's the idea here. Maybe we'll see more examples of that as we go. All right, yeah, here's that spiral thing. I've showed this before. I think when I was talking about historical geology and talking about the origins of the Earth as a planet, and this was just to help conceive of how massive 4.6 billion years is. And I may have pointed this out before, but it's worth mentioning again that it's really 3 billion years ago is when we start to see organic stuff, right? Things that suggest life or the building blocks of life today. And then you go to 2 billion years ago and we got that guy, and 1 billion years ago we got that guy, and we move forward and we got a jellyfish about 600 million years ago, and so on. Like, you look at life, that's not a complex DNA just happened situation, right? To have 500 million years go between this Twizzler to a jellyfish, right? That's a long amount of time, and that's not really impressive in how this evolution worked. And it'll continue along, and we see kind of an explosion of life. We got a few things going on here. More recent things have left behind better fossils and all that. So we just kind of have more evidence of more recent things. But also we see that when vascular plants, those plants with leaves and roots and veins and all that stuff, when they show up, when we go from some kind of algae sludge kind of stuff to plants as we tend to think of them today, that actually allows for other life to evolve. Again, it's an environmental thing. It's an ecosystem thing, right? So nothing just happens. And even I say, like vascular plants show up and there's an explosion. But that explosion takes place over millions of years. It's a relative concept. Okay? So keep that in mind. Very slow process. Now, as evolution is taking place, a key component here is this concept of variation. Right? It's the idea that animals, plants, things that don't clone themselves are going to allow for this variation, right? Like these bears, right? We got the mama bear, we got the baby bear, right? And so it's the idea that mama bear and papa bear get together, play some music, have some drinks, whatever, and then a little baby bear comes along, right? And that little baby bear is going to be a hybrid, right? Half of mom's DNA, half of dad's DNA. So it's the idea that it's related, but different. Still a distinctly unique organism, right? That's a key deal. So with that actually allows evolution to take place, right? Because if you think about it, if you just had bears just clone themselves, right? So the bear, decides it is time to reproduce, and it just I don't know, leaves a spore or a pod or something, and then an exact replica pops out of that. Like, you would have no evolution, right? But because of this variation, whenever you're making that hybrid, whenever you're having that DNA come together, and we'll talk about DNA later, but the genetic material, right, the instructions of how the organism should function and all that, when you get half of that from mom, half of that from dad, you introduce the possibility for changes, And that's what allows species evolution and diversity to take place. These opportunities for change. And can you see that? I mean, you look at the bear, right? And you see the mama bear and the baby bear. They look similar, but different, right? Like it's they're related, but totally different. You follow? Of course you don't follow. You know, you don't follow that. You don't know what a bear looks like. They all look the same, right? Let's look at people. Yeah, people, right? Now that we can tell. I mean, look at these fellas right here. I just took this off the internet, but you can look at it and you can see related clearly, right? But different. And you can also see which traits are quite powerful, right? Like mustache genes run very strong in this family, right? I mean, you just look at them, you see it. These guys look similar, but still different enough. Each one is a unique organism. They all have unique genetic coding within, right? And so that's what allows for this whole concept of evolution to take place. Again, that we're not cloning, right? There's this reproduction that introduces variation. And so that's a key component with Darwinian evolution and this whole idea of natural selection. Okay? And so natural selection, this is a big deal right here. And I should mention, like on your exam, you're going to be writing about evolution because it's an important deal. But a key part of writing about evolution is understanding natural selection, understanding what Darwin contributed, right? Because again, Darwin's whole deal, he didn't invent evolution. He came up with this explanation that is natural selection, a theory explaining how all of this stuff takes place. All right? And again, it's not theory like it's a guess, not that kind of idea, but a scientific theory, meaning it's a thorough explanation based on, at this point in time, over 150 years of research, continued research, attacks as well as supportive evidence and all that. So this is still solid. So it's definitely not a guess. Okay? And this is so his whole explanation with this is saying, look, with this variation that's taking place, okay, future organisms, these offspring, the babies, right, like the baby bear, whatever, if they get some kind of trait passed along, and that can be whatever thing it is. It could be something, seemingly superficial, like, fur color or eye color or something like that. It could be something internal, like how it's able to digest, certain foods or produce enzymes to help, digest stuff or whatever. Like any of that stuff, any of these traits, any of these new things that show up in the offspring, if they're successful in helping the offspring fill these niche roles, right? Remember, that's the whole idea from last time. The whole idea of the job, the profession of the organism, right? If that is successful, it helps the organism do its job, survive, right? And in nature by doing its job, being able to find enough food and live in a safe place and avoid predation and all that stuff. Well, then those are going to get passed along. Because that thing that's successful is going to grow up, find a mate, reproduce, and then pass along its genetic code. Okay? And if it has multiple babies, some of those babies might inherit that trait, others might not. And the sad reality is, if it really is, it helps with the success, the offspring of that creature that have the trait, they're going to grow up, they're going to be able to reproduce. Those that don't have the trait, they're not going to make it, right? It's just not going to work. They're not going to survive. They're not going to reproduce. And so eventually that trait just dominates the population until we get to a point where that's a new species, right? Until we get to a point where it changes, right? That's the concept there. And in Darwin's own words here, again, from The Origin of Species, as many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, Okay? And as consequently, there is a frequently recurring struggle for existence. So right there, you got a lot of babies being born, like, going back to, deer or gazelles or stuff like that, like we talked about last time. Think of those prey animals. Um, yeah, a lot of those are going to be eaten early on, right? Because they're not as fast as the adults and they just don't make it. You can watch any nature documentary, and there's always the sad image of the baby not surviving through the winter or avoiding the predator or whatever, right? That's what he's saying with this initial thing right here. So many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and the struggle for existence. Nature is hard. It's tough out there. It's brutal, right? So you're not guaranteed success when you're born in nature. Okay? So then from there, it follows that any being, if it vary, however slightly, in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving and thus be naturally selected. Okay? From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new and modified form. So what he's really getting, this whole natural selection idea, is it's saying there's not some, being out there, some referee or judge or whatever, who's saying, I like you, you're going to survive, you're not going to survive, right? It's not that, okay? Which is something we do have in like human society, right? We can have that take place in our society, but in nature, there is no referee or judge. Okay, it's a case of nature is taking care of it, and meaning that it's the luck of what you're born with genetically, what traits are actually useful for the environment in general, for that niche role in that ecosystem. So if you have even the slightest advantage, you're going to do better than everybody else. Okay, think back to last time I was talking about ecosystems and how they are um, efficient, right? Like food webs are efficient. Nature is very efficient because everything is just barely getting by. And if you're wasting energy or effort or anything like that, you're not going to make it, right? So everything's super efficient. And, a similar thing is like professional sports, right? The Olympics. This story always comes out with like the Summer Olympics. You'll have like Nike will design some kind of new suit for like our track team, right? So all our sprinters and our long distance runners and these folks, they get some new super cool state of the art suit from Nike that has this technology that's going to shave like a fraction of a second off of their time. It's going to make them like 1/8 of a second faster, all right? And it's like, whoa, that's the coolest thing in the world. But we don't really question it. And like, we'll buy this stuff because the next year, that same technology will be in the clothes we can buy. Fraction of a second doesn't matter for us, right? Like if we go to run, a marathon against an Olympic level marathoner, a fraction of a second isn't going to matter. We're going to lose by a day, right? So it's not a big deal. But when you have the best athletes in the world, right, that's where efficiency comes into play. If you can shave off that fraction of a second, here and then maybe do that here and here, like think of that as inherited traits, good traits, you're going to win. That's actually going to make the difference between the gold medal and the silver medal, right? That's the concept there. And the marathon thing, we'll talk about that. Just the fact that we humans can even run over 26 miles at one time and do that. There's something there. That says something about, evolution and natural selection and why we are the way we are. So we'll come back to just that concept of long distance running. That's a big human thing. All right, so we'll come back to that idea. But hopefully this makes sense, what natural selection really is. Any advantage that exists, even if it's the slightest little advantage, it's going to help that organism out. And that organism is going to be able to pass along its traits, and they will continue to be passed along, right, until we have something different. Okay, that's the idea. That's where we get this evolution from. Like this guy, this is a little mouse lemur. Oh my god, so cute. And lemurs in general, they are primates in the sense that they're related to monkeys and apes and therefore humans, but they're not actual monkeys. They're not apes. They're clearly not human. They're different, right? But related. That's the idea. Okay? And so with it, like this guy, this mouse lemur, looks distinctly different from other lemurs that exist, right? You can Google it. In fact, it's a good way to spend an afternoon. Just Google lemur pictures. Cute as beans. But this guy specifically, I mean, look at those big eyes, right? Look at those giant, adorable eyes. And those, of course, are useful for a nocturnal existence. It's able to see in the dark, right? Because it's got these eyes that can, better process what little light is out there and all that. So it's well suited for nighttime activities. But then other lemurs aren't like this, right? A ringtail lemur isn't the same way. It's got different eyes. It's diurnal, meaning it's active during the day, right? The opposite of nocturnal. So clearly, these things are related. And we go back to that common ancestor, right? Lemur A. When I think of it that way, there's change happening. There's that evolution and that natural selection happening so that these lemurs over here, totally new, different species, they're going to have the big eyes. They're going to be able to see at night. These lemurs over here, smaller eyes, they see during the day, and they, therefore live these different lives, right? The whole reason that happened, the reason why these big, adorable eyes would be selected for in this tiny little adorable lemur creature right here would be because in the specific environment in which these lemurs evolved, being able to be active at night as opposed to the day, that's an advantage, right? So we go back however many millions of years ago it was, or hundreds of thousands, or whenever that change happened. I'm not a big lemur guy. It's been a while since I read this stuff, so I don't know exactly the time frame. But whenever in the past, when we start to see this split between the nocturnal and the diurnal lemurs, it's the idea. We go off the assumption that they're all diurnal to begin with. What you're going to have is a lemur that's born, with it's not going to be like giant eyes right off the bat, right? Instead, it's going to have the eyes maybe a little tiny bit better. There's something in there that allows the lemur to be just a little more successful when it's a little bit darker outside, right? Maybe it can see just a little teeny bit better out there. And so it's able to, go out at dusk. And in doing so, it's able to avoid predators. It doesn't get eaten by a big snake or whatever. And therefore is able to grow up, mature, find a mate, reproduce, and pass along that stuff. And over multiple generations, right? So again, this is an instantaneous thing, but eventually, over a very long period of time, you get to the point where the, great, 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 great grandchildren of that original one, they have more advanced eyes like this. They're able to live a completely nocturnal lifestyle, and that's incredibly advantageous because their predators are asleep at that time, or they're able to hide in the dark, or whatever it is, right? So it's been naturally selected for. No referee out in nature said, you know what, I like these nocturnal lemurs, you get to survive, and you other ones, you don't get to survive, or whatever. No, it's in this specific ecosystem. Being a little nocturnal lemur was more successful than being a diurnal lemur, and therefore, selected for naturally, it's able to pass along its genetic material, and that's why we have these mouse lemurs today, which are distinctly different from other lemurs that exist. And so based on that, what's the key thing with natural selection? Like, have you guys heard the term survival of the fittest? Of course you have. It's a term Darwin never used. At least I haven't seen it in anything. But we always attribute it to this stuff. And we tend to think that, like, survival of the fittest means the strongest, smartest, bravest, whatever that's out there, right? No. That's wrong. What does fit really mean, or the fittest in this case, or even if we don't mess with that? What's the key thing for evolution and specifically natural selection? You thinking about it? You're not very really. Students you're such prudes when you do this stuff. You're too polite. Or maybe now that you're not in a classroom, maybe you're shouting it into your phone or your computer or whatever, because it's not me there staring at you guys. What's the key thing? Sex, right? That's the key thing behind evolution and natural selection. It's all about sex. In fact, it's not even just all about sex, or it's not just getting some, right? It's about knocking somebody up, right? Impregnating someone or being impregnated. That's the key thing, because you can have these incredible traits. You can be the strongest and the bravest and the most clever and all that stuff, but if you can't reproduce, in a way to have offspring, to pass along those traits, from an evolutionary standpoint, you disappear, right? Your genetic code stops with you if you don't reproduce. All right, so it's all about sex and babies, and that's something they don't talk about in a lot of these other classes. In fact, it's why I liked anthropology when I started out, because they actually, thought more about this stuff. And I had classes like at UCLA where they were getting into, one guy just, it's all about sex, and bless his heart. Like that's an important thing, because that helps to explain so much, right? And it gets through some of these myths that we tell ourselves about what evolution really is all about. Sex, babies. All right, keep that in mind as I go on to discuss this other stuff. And as you're reading the textbook and taking the tests and all that, it's all about getting some, all about knocking somebody up, right? You follow? Yeah, this is the real stuff. This is why don't waste your time with the biology class. We tell you the real stuff over here in the social sciences. All right, so that's natural selection. Now let's get into evidence of said natural selection, because at this point, I've kind of told a story, and it's all well and good. But what you should be doing is saying, like, what, prove it, right? How do we know? How do we know that this natural selection thing is the best explanation that exists for why we have species diversity? Well, I'm glad you asked. I will tell you, and I'll focus on two things. And I should stress, this is not a comprehensive list. This is not comprehensive evidence right here. In the interest of time, I'm going to present a few different things to show you how different scientists from different disciplines have figured this stuff out and have continued to support Darwin. And so I'm going to talk about two things: extinct fossils and extant behaviors. And extant is the opposite of extinct. So extinct means no longer existing on the planet, right? Whereas extant is existing today, right? So that's what it means. So fossils of things that no longer exist, and behaviors in creatures that currently do exist. All right, and this image we have here, that's Australopithecus afarensis. The idea of Lucy, if you've heard of that hominid, this not quite the missing link, but an important key figure, organism in our family tree, right? This is an extinct creature that's not quite human, but closer to that than being fully ape in that sense, and a creature that does not exist today. So this isn't a chimpanzee or a gorilla or whatever. It's something that's no longer around, but it's one of those common ancestors that helps to explain why we exist, we humans exist the way we do, and why chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans and these great apes that are related to us but different, right? It's showing that one of those organisms where we both descend, or all of us descend from, right? Again, that's that common ancestor idea. All right? So fossils, extinct fossils, are incredibly important, as we're studying this stuff. We have paleontologists going out, and it's not just, dinosaurs and stuff like that. It's getting out and trying to find, anything, mammals of all different types, and, birds and reptiles and things like that, and finding species that no longer exist today, but are clearly related to things that exist today. So, like on the left of this slide, we got this guy right here, this primate that we don't see. So it's dating from 55 million years ago. It's the MA stands for. So this is somebody, a team of paleontologists was digging around, found this thing, right? And so in here, this is a great find because it's almost complete. It's so full of the different bones. We never find some fully 100% complete skeleton, fossilized skeleton of a creature, right? Over millions of years, you're going to lose some stuff, or stuff isn't going to properly fossilize. But with this, we at least have a sense of what this creature looked like. And then the next step would be to articulate the bones, get a sense of like how the femur right here actually met the hip bones itself, right? To see, did it stand up or did it walk on all fours and that kind of stuff. And in doing this and recreating it, you get a sense that, it's got to be arboreal, meaning it lived in trees based on what we know about, mammals today and their physiology and all that stuff, right? So they figure that out, they flesh it out to get a sense of what it would have looked like if you saw it, if you were alive 55 million years ago and you saw one of these things. So they figure out, what did this creature look like? And then once you figured all that stuff out, you start to compare it to other things that exist today. Right? A great resource are teeth of creatures. A lot of primate evolution is understood through the teeth of whatever it might be. Whether we're talking about, kind of more primitive, lesser primates, if you want to say it that way, or, apes and hominids and humans and all that. Just studying the teeth has really shown this idea of evolution and the descent from a common ancestor, where the molars and stuff in the back, they slowly transform. And so once we have all these fossils and we line them up, we can see the change from, happening over millions of years, but the change going from, this organism and then this different species, they have a similar type of tooth, but slightly different. And then that changes a little bit and we can connect this stuff, right? And so we get to the point where today, like this slender loris, which, these primates are the best, right? The most Muppet-like creatures ever. But it's the idea, this is what's existing today, definitely related to this guy back here, right? This guy extinct, but we can start to connect the dots. And we can see not only, how this guy works, but also how he's related to other similar living primates today. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. And, for me, a lot of this stuff when I was first studying it and learning it, it was based, not so much in the little guys, the lemurs and all that stuff, but the big guys, right? So let's look at these three skeletons right here. So we got this guy. Who's this? It's us, right? Homo sapiens. That's people. Modern humans right there. This guy, Pan troglodytes. Right, chimpanzees, absolutely, very good. Yeah, it's a chimp skeleton. What I love about this image too, I stole this one off the internet, but it's the idea, the really like the dirty color right here, like that's a real skeleton. We can assume here the nice white, it's probably a model, right? So that's just because we're not monsters, we don't want to just keep chimpanzee bones out on display, but humans go for it. So these are two living creatures. And then this guy, Australopithecus sediba, no longer existing, but thought to be a common ancestor for both of us. Okay? And this is the thing, like chimpanzees, we are most related to chimps, from a DNA standpoint than anything else on the planet. In fact, does anybody know? Anybody know? I can't get out of teaching in a classroom. Do you know how much DNA we share with chimpanzees? It's like 98.5% of our DNA, our human DNA, is the same as chimpanzee DNA. So if you go down to like the LA Zoo, you got a lot of chimpanzees there, and you're looking at these things. Like, keep that in mind. 98.5% the DNA is the same. Now, another important thing: how much DNA do we share with a banana? It's like 44%, right? So clearly there's a lot of overlap and all that, and two, to go back, like, not only is, basically half our DNA just garbage generic stuff, banana level DNA, but also that 98.5% that we share, that remaining 1.5% is huge, right? As far as I know, chimpanzees have not sent rockets into space and composed symphonies and things like that. There's a big difference between a chimpanzee and a human. But the key thing here is that we did not descend from chimpanzees. That's something that people who don't fully understand evolution tend to say, like, well, you're telling me, my grandpa was a gorilla? No, no one is saying that. Because you knew your grandpa, and like, no, we don't. It doesn't happen that quickly. But B, no, any of this stuff that's living today is not. We're not directly descended from it, right? There was a split. That's the idea. Okay, it was something like Australopithecus sediba, and when you look at all of this evidence that we have, you see there's an amazing amount of stuff out there. These fossils of things that no longer exist, but are clearly connected to us in some way. Right? So we have, here we have Sediba, right? Here, we have, so the AU is the Australopithecus, the H is Homo, and you can see, like, even with Homo sapiens, that's us, really modern looking, but we have these other skulls that they're clearly not in this more ape-like Australopithecine group. They're bigger brains, more human-like, but they're still not fully human, right? Homo habilis, ergaster, these different ones here, different enough to suggest a different species, or at least more of a variety. There's a lot of discussion on how Neanderthals actually still exist today. There's a lot of thought that if you're European, or if you have European ancestry, there's a good chance that your ancestors way long ago, bred with Neanderthals. And it's not so much that Neanderthals just went extinct, but kind of bred with, either Homo sapiens or something else to make Homo sapiens, something along those lines. Right? My brother has this occipital bump, which is a key thing for the Neanderthal skull. It's fascinating. I'm part Neanderthal, I'm sure. Being a pasty white guy. So it's not as simple as just all different species, and there's a lot to still learn from this stuff. People are going out there finding new stuff. We're challenging what we thought about things. So we don't have all the answers yet into exactly what that family tree looks like, but we know it's a complicated thing, right? And we're constantly working toward this. And so that's how we've learned a lot of this about natural selection, is we can look and see, like, yeah, there's clearly this descent that's taking place. Start with a common ancestor, changes happen, they're clearly naturally selected for, and so we get these new species, and that also helps to explain why we have these different living species that we have today. You follow? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so that's our extinct fossil stuff. Now, the other thing is looking at behaviors of stuff that is existing today. This right here, it's a great study. One of my favorites that I've seen in recent years, and it's all. I mean, you can read all the nerdy title stuff, and you can see this is how we label and title our scientific work. It's very long, not really sexy titles in here. It tells you exactly what you're getting, though. But really, what this means, what they're looking at here, is they got some monkeys. All right, these are researchers, and they set them in like monkey chairs or whatever, and hooked up little electrode things to monitor brain activity. Okay, they didn't hurt the monkeys, I'm sure. Hopefully, but they just had monkeys sitting in chairs. I think they were like Japanese macaques. Is the species, and they're sitting down watching TV. Okay, and they show like on computer screens or whatever these images to the monkeys, and they're seeing what their brains are doing. Right, felt pretty straightforward. And so they show like a picture of another monkey, and the brain does whatever the brain does, and they show like a banana, right? Brain does what the brain does, but then they show a picture of something like this. Yeah, snake, right? Whenever they show a snake on the screen, a part of the brain in these monkeys lights up in a totally different way. Like a different part of the brain is working, right? When that snake image shows up. Now, with this, they're not saying that these monkeys were therefore afraid of snakes, but what they're really saying is that there's something in these monkey brains that allows for this quick detection of a snake, right? It says it in the title, the past selection for rapid detection of snakes. It's the idea that these monkeys had evolved to, in their little monkey brains, when they saw something that was snake-like, right? However you want to define snake-like, right? They saw that, they could tell, right? Something's going on with this thing. They didn't, fear is something that we learn, that kind of stuff. So it might not have been truly fear, but just kind of something's not right, right? My brain is doing something different here. I'm just going to avoid this thing. There's something about this. I don't even know what it is, but I'm gonna take the long way. I'm going to avoid this thing. Now, why would that be useful as a trait that would help you survive and grow up and reproduce and pass along this stuff? All right, so you don't get eaten, right? Snakes are big time predators of little monkeys and all of that. So, yeah, that would be fantastic. That would be quite the advantage to be able to do that. And I mean, for me personally, I hate snakes. Um, oh, so much. And my daughter loves them. She wants a pet snake. I tell her, no, never. We fight about it all the time. Can't stand them. Yeah, I dealt with a lot of them. I grew up in a rural part of the state. Had rattlesnakes all over the property all the time. Can't stand these things. They creep me out, right? And that's clear. That's a social thing. That's something I've learned. So it's not that case, but I also know, like for me, I'll be walking along, and if there's a bungee cord or a piece of rope or something, just left on the ground, and it's got like some kind of diamond pattern or whatever in it, I freak out, right? It like that split second, like right before I even know what it is, it just has that snake quality to it. I could totally see humans having the same thing. I don't know how extensive this is in primates. But that's something. That's a fascinating thing that also kind of gets at like this idea of instinct or why we feel the way we do or whatever. And a lot of people say like instinct, yeah, that's something evolution can't really explain why some things know what they know, right? Actually, evolution and natural selection can explain it, right? If you don't have that change, that genetic trait show up, you're not going to be as successful as the other things, right? Until it gets to the point where all of species X, behaves in this certain way, has this extinctual thing, or treats, other objects like snakes or whatever in that way, right? And so we don't even think about it as an evolutionary thing. We just think, all birds fly south for the winter or whatever. But no, it's a thing that to be successful, you had that trait that told you to migrate, and that allowed these birds to reproduce and pass along their traits, and others that didn't do it, disappeared, right? That's the concept. Now, for some of you guys, you might not like snakes. You might be like, it's ridiculous. But there's other stuff, like years and years ago. I don't even know which kid it was of mine where this happened. But my wife, she was at home. We were all at home. One of my kids was a little baby playing in our little playroom area where we had all the toys and all that stuff. And my wife's hanging out with the kid. I'm doing, I don't know, whatever, deadbeat dad, however you want to think about it. So she's in there with the baby, and then a spider comes by, just kind of crawling through the room. Now my wife, being the good person that she is, she sees this spider and like, well, I don't want the spider to bite my little baby. It wasn't like a black widow, but it was clearly a bitey spider, a wolf spider, and oh, they got a big thing driving by, but it kind of adds to the ominous spider story, I think. So it's it's a bitey spider, so she wants to scoop it up to take it out of the playroom, put it outside. She doesn't want to squish it or kill it, for its little spider soul or whatever garbage she believes or whatever, right? So she just wants to take it out. But she notices that this wolf spider doesn't look quite the same as a normal wolf spider would. So she calls me over. She's like, look at this. This thing just looks fatter than normal. I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's a spider. Look, I got stuff to do, right? So I can just humor her and move on. But she goes down with like a piece of paper or whatever to scoop this thing up. And so she gets it under the spider and starts to pull it up into the air to carry it outside. But the spider panics and it runs off of the paper. And it's only like, 7 inches off of the ground at this point. But the spider jumps off the paper and then it shatters and explodes into millions of teeny tiny spiders. This is what it was. Turns out, this is why this spider looked so fat. It was a mama spider, right? And what these wolf spiders do, the moms, when these little spiderlings hatch, they're too tiny to survive in the world, so they load up on mom's back, right? And to our big, dumb human eyes, it just looked like, that's a fat spider. No, it was a bazillion tiny baby spiders on mom's back, and so they fall, and they go everywhere. And my wife, swear to God, she lifts one leg up like a flamingo, and she just simply says, and that's all she can do. I'm actually now excited at this point. She's catatonic. I miss her every day. But I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. And now I feel bad because I'm realizing like instantly what's going on. These are baby spiders. It was a mama. So now I feel guilty. Like, nobody wants to hurt a baby. So I try to scoop up these babies, but my big fat human fingers, I killed a lot of baby spiders just because I couldn't scoop them up. And I got some paper. I saved like 14 million of the babies. Don't worry. And the mom, and I was able to scoot them outside, and I apologize for what went on. But that was fantastic, right? I mean, it was just amazing. And see, like that, I got excited about it. But honestly, I know from experience in showing this image in a classroom, in a lecture hall, with you students sitting there, that for a bunch of you, this image is not cool. I've had students shout at me, make it go. No, things like that. It's fantastic. And that's the crazy thing, too. This creeps us out big time. But these spiders could not harm us. Like the baby spiders. It's the oogiest thing in the world. But at the same time, they can't, like my fingers. I was just squishing them. If I threw, let's say I find out where you live, which I think I have that ability. So I get your address and I show up to your house. Even if it's an online class that we're doing here, and I have a pocket full of these baby spiders, and I just throw them on you, right? You'd probably die. Your heart would stop. You'd freak out. But why, right? They can't hurt you. Their mouths aren't big enough to bite you, and even if they did, you'd be like, ow. But they're not venomous or anything like that. If anything, it would kind of tickle and be a great experience. But no, right? Why? Because spiders, there's something that doesn't quite work for people, right? We don't like them typically. And again, as I said, fear and a lot of that's a social thing. But just that idea of seeing a spider as something different from something else, there could be some natural selection in there, some evolutionary, reason why we think snakes or spiders or any of these other things are oogie and other things don't freak us out. And when you think about it too, that's another amazing thing with like modern society. We can really see this at play where we have things we're afraid of and all that, but it rarely actually, corresponds with some of the modern stuff we should be afraid of. Like we're afraid of kind of more visceral stuff, but things like cars. God, that should freak us out to drive faster than 5 miles per hour. But we don't. It could kill us big time. But here's the deal, we haven't evolved with cars or with speeds of greater than 10 miles per hour, right? So we get in the car, we buckle up, which that's an amazing thing. When you put on that seatbelt, when you buckle up there, you're basically saying, might not make it out of this alive, right? Might not make it out of this in one piece, but we don't even think about it. We'll drive 60 miles an hour easily down an arterial street, texting the whole time because, we got to know, what's up with people. We're doing that. We're distracted. We're doing all this stuff. Doesn't freak us out at all, right? Teeny tiny baby spiders, oh, we lose our minds, right? Think about that. That's the idea. So we're looking at behavior of things that live today, whether it's us, whether it's other organisms, and we can start to get a sense of, here's why, we are the way we are, whatever. Some of that could in fact be evolutionary, that our brains are hardwired in this way because it was an advantage for our ancestors. And with humans too, we're complex enough that we can see that there isn't necessarily a universal concept in some ways because we have, different groups evolving in different areas. And there's like a study years ago, like Nepalese people have evolved over the generations slightly greater lung capacity, right? People living in the Himalaya, and around them in this area where the air is thinner, that's an environmental thing where if you have slightly better lung capacity, that's going to be an advantage, right? So we can have, little local, real physiological stuff, but it can also be a behavioral thing, or these things could also perhaps go together. There's a lot out there that we're still studying, still talking about, and that's some of the stuff I find fascinating, right? And I realize too, I'm still hanging on the baby spider. I'm sorry, I'll move on. I'll get away from the baby spiders. Yeah, you probably fast forward it or not. Embrace it. Stare into those mama eyes. Isn't that great? It's fantastic. And I got this picture from a book. One of my kids had a spider book, and the picture was in there. I'm like, that's what we did. So I scanned it for you. You're welcome. All right. Now, with both of this stuff, when looking at, extinct organisms and behaviors and stuff like that, another thing we can do, and just as we're learning more and more, is we can also question is like, why, right? One really great why question is why bipedalism in humans? Bipedalism meaning we walk upright on two legs, right? And we're the only, organism that operates in this way. I mean, technically birds have, are walking on two legs, but it's a different structure altogether. When you look at all the mammals and the primates and all that, we humans are the only ones who naturally walk upright. Right? And it's, if we kind of fall into that trap of evolution, if it's a thing where it's all progress and it's we're bipedal because that's the best, right? We're gonna miss it, right? Because because I'll be honest with you, being bipedal, it's garbage. It's terrible. And you young students watching this lecture, listening to me talk here, you're like, what do you mean? It's great. It's because your back hasn't given out on you. Awful. It's happened to me twice in my life. One, quite recently, and it's just terrible. Where just for whatever reason, my back decides, no, if you try to move, I will give you incredible pain. And so I'm just, for a week, just lying flat on the floor, praying for death. All right? That's bipedalism. Our knees are terrible. I've blown that out too. My knees are garbage. My back is garbage. Everything hurts. students, let me tell you, you little 20-year-olds listening to this, you make me sick with your proper joints and your full heads of hair and all that. No, garbage. It's all going to fall apart on you. So being bipedal, it's not like this is the best situation here. It isn't. And then other people say, like the thing I always learned growing up, hearing from teachers or reading in books or whatever, was that the idea that it's great because if we're walking on 2 feet, we've got our free hands, right? And we can pick up tools and make things and have spears and stuff like that. Hence, bipedal. You heard that? It's garbage. Makes no sense. All right. It's because it's not. We don't see any evidence of the very first, more upright walking hominid. Like instantly, as soon as that thing is born, like a spear falls from the sky, and it goes hand in hand. Right. There's a big gap between what we think of as that kind of technology, where being bipedal is an advantage. There's a gap between the technology and the actual bipedalism, right? It wasn't an instant thing, which means that the technology came around later. It did make it easier for tools, and that's cool. And maybe that's why we're still around, but that's not why we start out bipedal, right? It doesn't make sense in that way. So we have different hypotheses to explain this, and this step we're working in hypotheses because we haven't yet found that evidence that says, aha, this is exactly it, and we come up with a theory of bipedalism or whatever, right? But here are a few that I like. This first one, represented by the Gary Larson Far Side cartoon, right there. I forget the article. This was something, it was like I heard on the news, and I looked it up, and I haven't gone back to figure out the authors or the exact title or the name of the hypothesis or whatever. I just call it the nerd hypothesis because I think that it fits. Or maybe, the freak hypothesis, you could also do that. But this helps to explain a possible reason why we humans are bipedal. So to understand it, you've got to go back. You've got to envision this non-bipedal group of hominids, some early ancestor of humans. And so, again, like I said, we humans are the only ones walking upright. We can look at the apes today, chimps and gorillas and all these folks. They do what we call knuckle walking, which I normally demonstrate in class, but we're not in class, so, you can Google it. But it's the idea that they're hunched over, and they walk on the middle bone in your finger. Like if you bend it, you're looking at your finger, the middle one right there, that would be the thing that actually rests on the ground. And so it's not quite, four-legged mobility like a dog or a cat or whatever, but they also aren't quite bipedal. They can walk upright for short periods of time, but they do the knuckle walking. That's their kind of default form of mobility, right? So picture these early hominids. That's what they're doing. They're knuckle walking. They're moving around. I'm such a dummy. I'm actually play acting this in front of my computer as I record it. None of you can see it. Thank God. But yeah, so everybody's knuckle walking, and you get this one knuckle walker guy. He meets a knuckle walker lady. One thing leads to another. They have strings and baby, right? Have a baby, pops out, and look, if you're a parent, you love your kid, no matter what. This baby's a freak. It doesn't look quite right. Okay, but then look, they're gonna raise it. It's gonna be okay. He'll grow out of this awkward phase or whatever. Doesn't grow out of the awkward phase. Okay. Well, all the other, cave babies, hominid babies, whatever, are starting to take their first knuckle walks. Now this kid, he's moving around just on two legs. His hands are up in the air, waving around, and he's just scooting along, cruising along. And the parents go, "My God, our kid's a freak." And again, they love him, but they're like, "Hey, you can do that in the cave. When you go outside, try to walk on your knuckles." And of course, it's awkward. You try it. You knuckle walk, you bipedal listener to this. You get tired after a while. So this kid is who this kid is. He is going to let, his bipedalism just fly out there for everyone. But of course, kids are mean, right? So as our little bipedal kid is scooting around on two legs, everybody's making fun of him. And this goes on through, like Cave Elementary School and Cave Middle School, junior high. That's the worst time for any bipedal kid who's not fitting in, right? And even gets to high school and still nobody likes him. Nobody accepts him. So, of course, this kid, our bipedal kid, he wears a lot of black and he writes poetry. And of course, he goes for long walks and things like that because he can. And so he does that when all the other hominid teenagers are playing cave football or whatever, cave cheerleading, all that stuff. And so he's out for one of his long, depressing walks one day, but he sees on the ground a shiny rock. All right, this is just this shiny, nice rock, and he picks it up. It's all sparkly and all that, and he picks it up, and he's just excited. He's just looking at it, lost in just thought right there, and he walks back into Cave Town. And as he's getting back close to home, he sees this really popular girl from Cave High School, and she sees him with the rock, and she's interested in it, and he sees that, and he hands her this shiny, sparkly rock, and she immediately says, "Take me now, take me now, put babies in me now, do what you will, just let me keep the shiny, sparkly rock." And so he does. He's a teenager, hormones, all that stuff. So he knocks her up right there, right? And then he immediately, after he's done, he runs back out to where he found it, and he's just picking up shiny, sparkly rocks like crazy, bringing them back, and he can, of course, because he doesn't have to knuckle walk. So he's carrying them in his hands and walking with his two legs, and he goes back, and he just knocks up everybody in town, right? Everybody. And then 9 months later, or whatever the gestation period is for these early guys, upright babies, right? Just like that. Now, to be fair, the article I read did not exactly explain it in this way, but they effectively explained it in that way, right? They didn't get into Cave High School, but still, it's the idea that bipedalism, it was an advantage because you could give gifts to females, and this is one of the greatest. This is when I knew like I was in the right place. My very first anthropology class I took, and I say like I was in the right place. I left anthropology, but still they're good people. But just like, academia and social sciences in general, and how I knew these were my people. One of the greatest terms for all this, it's access to genitals, right? Isn't that great? I heard that as like an 18-year-old. I'm like, yep, this is where I'm at. What a great term, right? So what you could do if you were bipedal, you could go get shiny rocks and give them to females of the species and get access to their genitals. Yeah! And we still do this today, right? Because what is that shiny rock? Come on, you know what it is. Some of you guys are wearing them right now, probably, right? An engagement ring, a diamond ring, jewelry, right? I mean, what? I've been through that, right? It's the whole thing. You get a shiny rock, present it to a female. You give you rock, put babies in you, and she says yes and takes pictures with the shiny access to genitals rock, and then you have kids. Like, that's the story of my life, right there. So yeah, the engagement ring, same deal. How fantastic is that? That's great. So it's not this romantic and noble thing like, yes, the first humans stood upright to make technology. No, shiny rocks, access to genitals, and we can see too. I mean, we don't see exact shiny rock stuff going on in modern primates, but we do see some of this behavior kind of working, where you'll have chimpanzees who are monogamous, meaning the male and the female pair up, right? Like get married effectively, and you can see like a chimp baby, adorable, but much like human babies, kind of garbage, kind of useless out there in nature, right? So what the male will do is when mom's back protecting the baby, is he will go out and pick fruit off of trees and kind of waddles back, right? It's difficult. It's not as easy as being fully bipedal, but it's the idea of being able to take this fruit back, feed it to the mother and child. That's going to ensure that the child grows up, it's able to reproduce on its own and pass along these traits, right? I think it's fantastic. Fantastic stuff. Maybe you don't. But that's a pretty cool thing. Now another deal too And with some of these, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the only reason or exactly why it happened, because there's this other hypothesis, the persistence hunting hypothesis. Persistence meaning, not giving up. Hunting meaning, hunting prey. All right. And so it's the idea, too, that why bipedalism would be useful for humans is, well, first off, look at us, right? When it comes to our ability to survive in nature, if we don't have tools of some kind, technology of some kind, we're garbage. Like, you put us naked out in the jungle, we're going to be dead in a half a second, right? We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have claws at all. We have lame little fingernails and stuff like that. And to run away from something, forget about it. Because when it comes to sprinting, right, running fast over short distances, we're garbage at that stuff. And we might think, like, we'll watch, the NFL and we'll see a running back and we'll be like, man, that guy's so fast. Garbage, right? It's like, yeah, for humans, that's impressive. But your cat or dog, who isn't even training, could effortlessly outrun that guy, right? We are pathetic, terrible when it comes to surviving out in nature with just our own bodies, right? But one thing we can do is we can't run fast over a short period of time compared to other creatures, but we can run forever, right? Relatively fast for a very long period of time, right? Like, going back to the idea of a marathon, of long distance running, right? We can do that. And we can do this because we are upright and we're also relatively hairless compared to other stuff, and we sweat, okay? And so through sweating, that's a cooling mechanism. Other things don't do that, right? Look at a dog panting, trying to cool off. That's how they're getting rid of this excess heat. We're sweating, that keeps our bodies cool so we don't overheat. Also, our upright posture, it allows for that heat displacement in a much easier way. So we can run slowly but all day long. And so this persistence hunting hypothesis is saying, yeah, that's the key. That's the thing. That's why we are upright in this way. That was our advantage, right? That was the trait that allowed humans to be successful and to become our own species. And so you picture, in East Africa, the humans show up, and it's the idea that we have hominids coming out of the trees, going out into the savannah, into the grassland. And I mean, think about that. No cool claws or really any advantage compared to the other stuff that's out there. But these humans, show up in the grasslands and they see an antelope or a gazelle or whatever in the distance, and like, oh, that looks so yummy. God, I would love to eat it. But, we haven't invented bows and arrows or spears or anything like that yet. How are we going to catch this thing? I don't know. Let's just get it, right? And so the humans start running, but a really slow rate. Like, the gazelle looks at the humans and just kind of like keeps grazing. And then as the humans start to get close, after a while, it like will sprint off, a handful of yards and then look back, and the humans are still running slowly. But it's pathetic, right? Because they're never going to catch it. But then fast forward 4 or 5 hours, right? The humans are still running at that same rate. We can run all day, right? But that gazelle is dying, literally dying, because it's getting overheated, and it's not able to run for a long distance over a long period of time. So eventually the gazelle just falls over, dead or half dead. The humans just jog right up to it, punch it to make sure it's really dead, and they have their gazelle burger or whatever. Isn't that great? And think about how awful that is, too. That, how would you rather be eaten if you're out there on the savannah? Would you rather have a lion jump on you and kill you instantly, right? You're dead. Or would you rather have humans show up, and after like 5 or 6 hours, you're going to, after you've exercised for an ungodly amount of time, then you're going to die, right? Give me a lion any day. We were jerks. Awful jerks. But it was a successful thing. And people would say, okay, yeah, all right. Like, that could happen. No, here's the deal. It can happen because we've tested it. Right? There are a group of long-distance runners that went out, I think it was in Nevada, like out in the Great Basin, and found some pronghorn antelope or whatever, and they just tried to outrun them. They tried to do this. And one of the runners had like a handgun in his fanny pack or whatever. like just in case it got real, to put the animal out of its misery. And sure enough, working together, these runners could like flank this one, and they isolated this one pronghorn antelope from the rest of the antelope that were out there, and they just kept running it until it just fell over and collapses. And like the guy goes up with a gun, but he's like, nah, it's cool, good race, antelope, which is actually crueler. Because that antelope probably had like a stroke or something like moments later and died a horrible, painful death. But still, it proved that humans can do it, right? So think about that. Like, we didn't show up with spears and rock tools and weapons and stuff like that. Bipedalism, it came for another reason, and then only later was it something where it was actually, yeah, it was kind of nice because we could make stuff and carry stuff and do these other things, right? And that's a key deal with evolution and natural selection is, again, don't fall into this trap of that romantic story of progress and all that. No, it's having stuff work for the environment, at the moment. Okay, that's the idea. Now, another way to look into this, and this is something that Darwin did, although he didn't use wolves and dogs, but it's the study of artificial selection. Okay, so natural selection is where this has taken place out, in nature. Again, no referee, judge, or whatever. Artificial selection is when we humans become that referee, right? When we start to breed animals, domesticate them. That's the term we use. So we actually make some new species, at least a new variety or whatever. But quite often it goes to a new species in many cases. And Darwin was looking at farm animals, cattle, oxen, stuff like that, sheep. But I think, dogs and wolves, that's something maybe more, modern Southern California folk can relate to a little better. But it's the idea that every dog that exists today, its ancestor was a wolf. And I think it's like a gray wolf in Asia was like the original common ancestor of all the dogs we have today. And it's a case of roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, when the Great Ice Age is ending. Humans are doing quite well from a human civilization standpoint. We're really starting to take off. Wolves take notice of this, and wolves decide, hey, let's hang out with these humans. They seem to have it figured out, and so there's this symbiotic relationship where wolves and humans are working together for hunting and protection and stuff like that. And it's great. Life is good. And so as life is good, the humans get to sit around and kind of think like, hey, these wolves are fantastic, but what if we take this really big boy wolf and this really big lady wolf and we get them together, are we going to get really big little baby wolves? And sure enough, it works, right? So we, humans learn that, okay, with this deliberate breeding, with specifically breeding two individuals, we can select for these traits, like in this case, size, right, being big. We can select for that artificially, right? We don't have nature playing its role out here. It's us saying, okay, you two get together, right? So the breeding of animals, that's artificial selection. And sure enough, it works. And the pups are all big, and so we can, breed for a specific, we want this personality, this, coloration, this size, that kind of stuff. And before you know it, boom, St. Bernard, right? Like, oh, look at this wolf. He's got kind of droopy jowls, and I like this brown and this white coloration. And, after enough generations, we get something like this, right? Meanwhile, opposite side of the planet, you get some people that are like, hey, look at that little wolf. It's all twitchy. And this wolf that pees on herself, let's get them together. And yeah, before you know it, Chihuahua. Right? Because there's no other way in which this thing could exist. There's no way to explain a Chihuahua with natural selection. Right? And I say that loving these pathetic, ridiculous creatures. But no, that's clearly human. And then what's really crazy is to see what, the outcome is. That these are both descendants of wolves, but so radically different. And we humans, we can enact incredible change in a relatively short amount of time when we're doing this artificial selection. So based on that, if we with a conscious end goal, if we can make this incredible species diversity, of course natural selection can work, right? That is a logical conclusion right there. So when we're dealing with billions of years, yeah, absolutely. We can have the same thing taking place. It's just because it's natural selection, because there's no referee deciding what's going on, what would be the best trait, or who's the winner in nature, or whatever. It's going to be a slower process. But yeah, why couldn't this happen in nature if we humans can do it, on our own? Right? That's a really important concept here. So that's artificial selection, and that's the kind of stuff that Darwin was getting into, and on the origin of species and his initial work here. Okay. Now, what's really cool is years later, roughly 100 years later, after Darwin is talking about this stuff, we figure out what DNA is all about. Okay? And DNA had been discovered prior, but it was in the 50s when Watson and Crick actually figured out what it is. And DNA, it's genetic blueprints. It's the instructions. It's what tells our body what to do, right? How our body is to function. And so genes, this concept within the DNA, this is going to control how we're going to look, how we're going to grow, what kind of food we can eat, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's what we're getting into with genetics. Now, Darwin knew about genetics, but it was a very primitive concept by today's standards. He had no idea that DNA existed. So when something like DNA shows up, like in science, quite often we have this new discovery and it radically changes how we think about stuff. What's great about Darwin's theory and about natural selection and why it's held up so long is that DNA actually went and just supported it, right? It didn't say oh, we were wrong. Darwin was wrong because he didn't know about this stuff. No. DNA is saying, yeah, Darwin was super right. And now we know exactly how this is working, and we can even trace it. Like in modern years, it's amazing what we've been able to discover because we're able to map, the human genome and look at the actual DNA itself and connect things and get a sense of evolution through that. And it's amazing. So Darwin didn't know about this stuff, but it really supports a lot of his ideas, and it helps to explain it. Like this idea of the gene pool. Okay, so with gene pool, again, genetics, all this stuff, this goes back to the 19th century. This isn't anything too radical, but based on what we know about DNA now, we can really map this and see it, and we really get how it works, right? So a gene pool refers to the genes possessed by a species, okay? Like these elephants right here. All of the adult elephants who are, fertile, able to reproduce, all of their genes, all of their DNA makes up the gene pool, right? And therefore, depending on which elephant reproduces with another elephant, all these traits can be passed on to future generations, all right? So that's the idea there. But what we can have happen is what we call mutation. And mutation is a thing where it sounds negative, but it isn't. It's a change, right? It's the idea that with DNA, as it's, as offspring are forming and all that, it's broken apart. And again, it's mom, half of hers and half of dad's, they come together to make this new organism, right? And the different, links of this ladder, if we go back, to this double helix concept right here, it's the idea that this guy and this guy come together and match up, right? But with mutation, sometimes there's an error in there and it doesn't match up in the way that it was supposed to initially. Right? But again, that's not a bad thing. That's how we get evolution, is you'll have some mutation, and if it is a good thing, fantastic. Then a trait, is it starts, and that organism who has that trait is going to be successful, is going to grow up, is going to reproduce, pass along that trait to its offspring, and those offspring will grow up and blah, 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 blah. right? And it continues forward. If the mutation is bad, then that organism isn't going to survive, right? Bad meaning that it's not going to help that organism fulfill its niche role, right? That's the idea. And not only that, is it not, always bad and sometimes it's good, it's also, it can be complicated. And one of the great examples that is used is the idea of sickle cell anemia, where it's a disease that shortens life. It's incredibly painful, from what I understand. I don't have myself, but I understand that when your red blood cells are doing the sickle thing, when they're curving like that, the pain is awful. So it's a miserable disease. But here's the deal: if you have the trait for sickle cell anemia, it's like one half of this thing you're walking around, you don't have the disease itself, and you're actually less susceptible to malaria. Okay? So if you're in a tropical location, you got a swampy area, a lot of mosquitoes, you can have a disease like malaria passed along, and that can be an awful, nasty thing. But if you've got this trait, fantastic. You're not as likely to die from malaria. So you can grow up, be successful, reproduce. But if you reproduce with someone who also has that trait, there's a chance that your offspring will have sickle cell anemia, right? So it's bad for that offspring, but not every single child you have is necessarily going to have it because of the way genetics works. So if you have the trait, it's a good thing. If you have the disease, it's a bad thing. You follow? And that, again, gets into natural selection. There's not that referee saying this will be good and only good, this will be bad and only bad. It's complicated and messy, and that's what evolution is. It's not, again, don't think about it as progress. Think about it as just stuff happens, right? And so that's what we see here, and that's how mutation affects stuff. And so with mutation, that's what's explaining, ultimately, this species diversity. Okay, so this, I grabbed this. This is like from an old textbook. It's just, that kind of fantastic, old-timey textbook drawing stuff in here. So with this, the last wild equids, these horse things out there in the world, you can see we got, horses and donkeys and zebras and all this stuff. They're all connected, related, and actually, horses, as we think about them, that's a domesticated thing, again, right? That's artificial selection. This is the stuff that is wild, right? Indigenous, however you want to think about it. Not a domesticated creature, these examples we have here. But they're all, horse-like. They're all related, so they have this common ancestor, all right? But this is where this concept of isolation comes into play. All right, once we have one population, one gene pool over here, all right, and then another one over here, and they're isolated from each other, we cut off the genetic material. Okay, so like if we have a population of horse-like creature down here, and we have one, thousands of miles away, they're going to be isolated. They're not going to interbreed, right? They're not going to make some epic journey to come down and date, the southern horse things or whatever. The gene pools are isolated, which means that any mutation that takes place down here won't happen up here, right? Because of that mutation, it's a random error. The odds of the exact same mutation happening, in another species within a certain amount of time, like it's impossible for that to take place based on all the things that could, happen, all the mutations that could happen, and so on, right? So any mutation that happens down here is only going to affect that one gene pool and not the other. And then also, because of that isolation, we're dealing with different environments, different ecosystems. So a mutation that is advantageous down here, it might actually not be advantageous up there, right? So even if that same mutation showed up, it's not a guaranteed thing that's going to get passed along, right? So isolation, again, geography is a big component. So like down here in the southern half of Africa, what's the clear mutation that took place, right? How are these guys clearly different from these guys up here. It's the stripes, right? A zebra. And you can see we have 3 distinct different types of species of zebra, based on this. I guess I'm not a zebra guy. I don't know. But it's the idea that the zebra has that very distinct striped black and white pattern, right? Why is that useful? Anybody watch Animal Planet? Do we know? Can I say anybody? Like you guys are shouting this out, but in class, I'd be asking like, what's the deal? And somebody say it's camouflage, and I say, bless your heart. How is that camouflage? Like, have you ever seen Africa? Is it just black and white lines just running everywhere? Of course not. That's the worst camouflage ever. Like I dare you, if you want to hide from somebody, put on a zebra suit and see how well you can blend in with your surroundings. Right? It's not fully camouflage, but one hypothesis. The idea is it actually helps with a herd of zebra, whatever we call a collection. I think it's a herd. I don't know. When you have a bunch of them together, it's like this optical illusion. So like if the lioness is coming up and wants to pounce on one and eat one of these things, if the zebra are all together, that lioness, you can't tell, is that the front end or the back end or whatever. So going for that kill strike is harder, right? That's the idea. So fantastic, okay? Clearly that's why these things are striped. Except, does that work? Does that make sense? No. Think about what you know about natural selection. What's the secret? We just talked about this, class. What's the secret? What's going on there? Sex, right? Getting some. Knocking somebody up. That zebra, that's a sexy horse. That's all it is. Like when it starts out, those stripes, oh, that looks good, right? That's the idea. That's what's going on. Because you don't have this mutation. It's going to happen to one individual, right? Initially. It's not like you have this spontaneous mutation in every single zebra that's born in this year. No, it's going to be one. And it probably isn't even a full stripe pattern. It might be just a little bit or slightly different coloration or something. But for that to be passed along, if that whole idea of, herd blending thing, it doesn't work if you don't have a herd, if you're the only one, right? So the only logical explanation is that's a sexy horse and therefore is able to reproduce, pass along those genes, and it keeps getting passed along. That's seen as sexy until everything looks like that and we have the zebra, right? That's it. It'll pay off down the road, and that's why we still have zebras. But to actually get that initial thing, there's not that plan in place. There's not that referee saying, oh, if we had striped ones, that would be cool. It's all sex, right? Remember that. And it also, think about that. I'm not going to go into it here. Again, take Geography 105. We're going to be talking about this. But you can extend this to people, right? Think about people living in this part of the world. Think about the different coloration of these people. What's the logical explanation? And we'll get into stuff like if you have darker skin, you can handle more sunshine and you don't get skin cancer. That's nonsense. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. No, you know what it is? It's in some places, black is beautiful. In other places, they prefer blondes and blue-eyed folk and all that. It's all sex. When you get down to racial variation, it's a sex thing. Ultimately, it's what was attractive, for that group based on mutations that took place. That's it. And that's with 105, the cultural class. We get into, and therefore that's why race is stupid and racism is stupid and all that. But yeah, when you start to understand how evolution works, you start to get a sense of why we have the differences we have and how there's not some logical reason for it. It's a sex thing. It's a messy thing, which is how life is, which is how nature is, right? So that's the secret. That's how it works. Now, that same idea with isolation, what Darwin did, he was looking at birds. He looked at finches, same idea, and beaks, and on these islands in the Galapagos, there were finches with bigger beaks, and they had them because there were more hard seeds on that island, and the ones with the insects, they had finches with smaller beaks that were able to capture the insects. It's not quite as fun to talk about as sexy zebras and horses, but it's the same idea. This is what Darwin was dealing with. This is how he was figuring it out, is he was looking at isolation. He was seeing on islands, we have similar but different things, and it's because of that isolation. Any mutation that happens, so in this population over here, isn't going to happen on this island over here with this population. You're not going to have that interbreeding. They're not flying from island to island to reproduce. And therefore, over time, over a long period of time, you're going to have these things that are clearly related. They share a lot of similarities, but they're also distinctly different. And so Darwin on the Galapagos, he's connecting with the birds and other animals, connecting this idea that everything is related, but there's this isolation. We have mutations, changes of some way, natural selection. He's piecing all this stuff together. And this is as he's sailing around the world on the HMS Beagle and seeing the world and seeing this different stuff. And it's a British military ship doing, again, not so good stuff, but Darwin is there and he's there as a scientist to learn. And apparently, what I understand, he could not figure out hammocks. He had a miserable time on the ship because he couldn't get a good night's sleep because he just couldn't get into his hammock at all. Like, a brilliant guy, complete bumbling fool, though, at the same time. You gotta love it. That is lovable. And here's what's crazy, too. So Darwin's sailing around, he's figuring this stuff out, and he's trying to piece it together, and he's also conflicted because of the religious implications, but he gets word from this other guy, Alfred Wallace, who's working around the same time, but he's in Indonesia. He's hopping around these different islands in Southeast Asia, and he actually figures out the same thing. So he comes up with natural selection at the exact same moment that Darwin does, and that freaks Darwin out, right? Can you imagine that? Your life's work, like, this is going to be something big, and then somebody says, hey, guess what I just figured out? And so actually the first publication was a couple of different articles. One, by Darwin, or I think it was like two things by Darwin, one by Wallace, and then Charles Lyell, I think it was Lyell, who wrote the forwards like, look, nobody's copying, everybody got this at the same time. Of course, we don't put a Wallace fish, on the back of our car. We don't talk about Alfred Wallace and natural selection. And I think Darwin was a more prolific writer, and I think he had better PR too. But I think what's cool about this is it shows the strength of this idea that two individuals working on opposite sides of the planet could come to that same conclusion. Again, it's the idea that Wallace is hanging out over here and he's seeing related but different organisms, over here and over here throughout the area. And it's the idea, if you go back far enough, in time, like what we know now today, is that with different ocean levels, you had, like during the Ice Age, right? Remember that used to see concept we talked about a long time ago. The oceans were lower. This stuff was connected, so it was easier for things to move back and forth. So you all have the same species. And then over, thousands of years, ocean levels are going up. These things become isolated, and that's when mutations start to take hold. And that's why they're related, and they look very related, but they're at the same time distinctly different species, right? So that's, again, the isolation thing. And we can extend it even further. Australia has been isolated for tens of millions of years, so they've got stuff, reptiles and mammals and things like that everybody else has, right? So going back, think back to Pangea and the idea that these continents are all one, life existing there, and then slowly over millions of years, it's starting to break apart. You're going to slowly start to get this isolation, and then in the case of Australia, you're going to have a long period of time where these things are isolated. That's why kangaroos look wrong, right? Just look at it. There's all sorts of wrong going on here, but it's because this is a mammal that was isolated for so long that these mutations that happened, they just stayed here in Australia, right? And they're great. I'm only saying it's wrong because I'm not from Australia, right? If these, come on, that is clearly wrong. But if this was an advantage, here in California, we'd see stuff, right, that looked like that here, but we don't because it wasn't. Again, natural selection. What's the advantage in that specific ecosystem, right? So that's the idea there. On these islands, we see very distinctly different stuff because of that isolation, then mutation, and then natural selection. And that leads to this incredible biodiversity, meaning all of the different species that exist out there in the world. And this goes back to that original quote from Darwin. We just have so much stuff that's related. I mean, look at these beetles right here. The idea of independent creation, right, of a creator or just random chance too, but just that idea of like, I'm going to create a beetle that's green. Now I want a beetle that's green with a little bit of gold. And now I want a beetle that's still green but has a slightly different type of antennae. And this one will have one white stripe. This one will have a different white stripe, but a little big. I mean, that just gets crazy. It gets untenable in that sense. So it's the idea that we start with like one early original beetle, and then again through natural selection and trait selection and all that stuff, we get these different things. All right, so that's what we're getting at with evolution, is we're trying to explain why we have millions of different species out there, many of which are quite related, but still distinctly different species. And it's important to note these numbers here, these are known species. And we see this every year. Coronavirus might thwart this a little bit, but you do have in a normal non-pandemic year, you have researchers going out, they come back and like, yeah, we discovered a new species of frog and this butterfly and listing stuff that we just haven't seen before. So we haven't even begun to find all of the species that are out there. And a lot of it's like tiny stuff that can hide, but they're also, like there was a new species of orangutan that was discovered a few years back, and I don't know exactly what made it a new species, but like there's some big stuff out there. The world's still a big place. We're still discovering that, and the reason why we can discover so much stuff is because evolution has been occurring for billions of years on this planet. And even more recently, for hundreds of thousands of years, it's been taking place and doing so in an incredible way. And the thing with biodiversity, what makes this important, is that biodiversity is also why life has been so durable on the planet, why it's lasted for so long. Like this image here of this forest, not the most diverse looking thing, right? And this is a rubber tree plantation in Cambodia. These are trees that have been planted specifically for industrial purposes. And so this is what we do with agriculture and industry and stuff like that, is we will, take one thing, like, I say we, like meaning just kind of humans in general. When we get into that kind of capitalist mindset of trying to, grow stuff to make a profit and all that, we'll focus our efforts on this. And so you see this, like if you buy furniture, everything made of wood, and it's made from some exotic hardwood from, the tropics somewhere, it'll say, sustainably harvested. This is what it means. It means there's some kind of tree farm where they're growing this tree so as not to destroy natural habitat. But the problem is when we do, like to get this, you had to clear natural habitat, right? But it also, when we just have this one organism, this one species, I should say, of say, rubber tree right here, it makes this ecosystem much more vulnerable to collapse. Because if some beetle comes in that feeds on this tree, or disease or whatever, if it spreads through here, the entire forest is wiped out, right? The entire ecosystem is wiped out. But in a normal, indigenous ecosystem, something that has just been able to evolve and be, and humans haven't messed with, you'll have, sure, the rubber tree that could be attacked, but there are other trees out there. So if this one species dies off for whatever reason, others will still be there. And those niche roles will still be filled and so on, right? So biodiversity is incredibly important. And that will lead to our final lecture for this course. I'm more excited than you are. I'm ready to stop talking into a computer. But our final one will get into biomes, which is discussing these massive ecosystems, and we'll get into things like the rainforest or the desert, and kind of start to connect stuff. See how ecosystems work with evolution, as well as connecting to, the other stuff we've talked about in the class. So the next and final lecture, he'll wrap a lot of this stuff up. It'll connect a lot of it and hopefully present that big picture to y'all. All right, geographers. Hope you at least learned something here today. Happy studying, and I'll talk to you later.